Okay, here's the question. Can you please tell me, when does the Earth exert an upward force on us? So let me try to explain the full question. We have a woman does push-ups by lowering her body to the floor using her arms and then pressing against the floor with her hands to push herself back up, as shown in the image below. Which force causes her to rise? The first thing you need to remember, an object does not change its state of motion, cannot move up or down or accelerate or whatever with a force that's not exerted by something other than the object. Okay, let me repeat that. No object can move or change its state of motion due to a force that does not originate from another object. So, for example, here, any force exerted by this woman is not the force that's going to push her up. That force has to come from somewhere else. So what does this woman do? She pushes against the floor. She pushes against the floor. Now, if you think of Newton's third law of motion, and here's Newton's third law of motion, all forces come in pairs. Whenever one object exerts a force on a second object, the second object exerts an equal and opposite force on the first. Now these pairs, they are always opposite in direction. When one is up, the other is down. They are always equal to each other, irrelevant of the size of the objects and what happens to them. It does not matter if one is large, one is small, or they are equal in size. The forces are equal to each other, always, the action and reaction. And the actors, the ones responsible for these forces, of course, they are objects. The objects are involved, the same objects are involved in both action and reaction. No new objects are involved. For example, here, this person is pushing on the wall. So hand pushing on the wall, that's the action. The reaction would be opposite in direction. So it's going to be pointing towards the left. And it is the wall pushing on the hand. The two actors were hand and wall. So they stay the same for the reaction. Wall and hand. This person is also affected by the gravitational force. The Earth is pulling down on him with a gravitational force. So that's a force between the person and the Earth. So the reaction should be a force between this person and the Earth. So this person is pulling up on the Earth with an equal force. So the force of gravity due to the Earth is pointing down. The force of gravity due to him is pulling up. The force of gravity due to the Earth is acting on him and exerted by the Earth. The force of gravity exerted by him is acting on the Earth, and it's pointing up. And these two forces are equal. One third force I might talk about here. The shoes of this person are pushing down against the floor. The reaction to that force would be the floor is pushing up against the shoes. Now, even though in strength, in this particular case, that force might be equal in strength to gravity, to the gravitational force exerted by the Earth, even though it's equal, it's a totally different force, and the pair is a totally different pair. It's coincidentally that they are equal to each other, not fundamentally. Let's go back to the question. So here she is pushing against the floor with her hands, so the reaction should be the floor pushing up on her hands. Okay, now let's look at the answers. The downward force of gravity that the Earth exerts on the woman, so that's a downward force, so it cannot push her up. And we need to look forces that are exerted on the woman, not forces that are exerted on something else, or not forces that are exerted by the woman. Neither one of these would work. The downward force that the woman's arm exerts on the ground, that cannot be correct because that's a force exerted by the woman. A force exerted by an object cannot change the motion of the same object. It has to be an outside force, a force by a different object. So that force acts on the ground. It might result in a dent on the ground. It does not affect the woman. The upward force that the ground exerts on the woman. So this would have been expressed better if it was mentioned the upward force that the floor exerts on the hands of the woman. That would be more precise in terms of the wording, but the floor here and the ground are meaning the same thing, and when we are pushing up on the woman, we are pushing on her hand. I meant to say when we are pushing on her hands, we are pushing on her overall. So this force is a reaction to the force that the woman is exerting against the floor. And it is upwards, so it's going to affect the motion of the woman upwards. Now let's look at this last answer. The upward force that the woman's arm exerts on the ground, very much the same argument as here. If the force is exerted by the woman, it cannot affect the woman. It might affect the ground, it cannot affect the woman. So we dismiss it on those grounds. Of course, it's not upwards since she's pushing down.